upset when trans women are able to carry children due to a uterus transplant.
Creating competition when it's not necessary is a sign of insecurity. Either way, no one would be upset, but I don't think we'd recommend it. I don't think we should really be talking about this in the same way we talk about other transplants, because you're supposed to have a heart, you're supposed to have a kidney. The male body is not supposed to have a uterus. And because you're biologically male, if you were to get a uterus transplant, your male DNA, in conjunction with your male body, would treat that uterus like the infection it thinks it is and attack accordingly. So before you even start talking about having children, you need to try to survive the transplant. You don't naturally produce enough progesterone to maintain that uterine lining. You could take it synthetically, but that will probably cause you more harm than good. You also don't produce enough blood to keep both you and baby alive. Your pelvis is too narrow and too thick, and it's not designed to spread. It would literally shatter. So no one would be upset. Try it if you want, but why would anyone be upset over something that would literally end you?
Penis envy is a term coined by Freud and used by him to describe a basic attitude found in neurotic women. The term had more than symbolic meaning to him. He was convinced that this envy in women grew out of a feeling of a biological lack beginning with the little girl's discovery in early childhood that she lacked something possessed by the little boy. Because of this, according to Freud, she believed that she had been castrated, and she dealt with the shock either by submitting the wish for a penis and the wish for a child, that is, becoming a normal woman, or the development of neurosis, or by a character change described as masculinity complex, a type of character which seeks to deny that any lack exists. Shortly after the proliferation of this theory in psychology circles, the women in the field protested at the absurdity of the suggestion. Freud's work was hypersexualized, had few instances of empirical proof to support them, but even now are still taught as pillars of psychology despite the impossibility of statistical analysis. His theories gained traction because of their absurdity and because they gave the answers that his clients' fathers, his benefactors, wanted to hear. Instead of admitting that young women were traumatized by real instances of childhood sexual abuse, Freud instead suggested that these were merely dreams, not memories, and that the victims actually wanted their fathers in a carnal way. Hysteria was so common among women that if his patients' stories were true, and if his theory was correct, he would be forced to conclude that what he called perverted acts against children were endemic, not only among the proletariat of Paris where he had first studied hysteria, but also among the respectable bourgeois families of Vienna where he had established his practice. This idea was simply unacceptable. It was beyond credibility. Faced with this dilemma, Freud stopped listening to his female patients. Though he continued to focus on his patients' sexual lives, he no longer acknowledged the exploitative nature of women's real experiences. With a stubborn persistence that drove him into the ever greater convolutions of theory, he insisted that women imagined and longed for the abusive sexual encounters of which they complained. He went on to develop a theory of human development in which the inferiority and mendacity of women are fundamental points of doctrine. In an anti-feminist political climate, this theory prospered and thrived. Freud's creation of hysteria is not the first diagnosis to be made as female-specific. His creation of the hysteria diagnosis came after that of the wandering womb. The idea that women's ailments stem from the uterus wandering within the body due to a lack of pregnancy stems back to the Greeks. A translation by Francis Adams states, "In the middle of the flanks of women lies the womb, a female viscus, closely resembling an animal, for it is moved of itself hither and thither in the flanks, also upward in a direct line to below the cartilage of the thorax, and also obliquely to the right or to the left, either to the liver or the spleen, and it likewise is subject to prolapsus downwards, and in a word, it is altogether erratic. It delights also in fragrant smells and advances towards them, and it has an aversion to fetid smells and flees from them, and on the whole the womb is like an animal within an animal." Plato continued the descriptive language to evoke what men found particularly irritating or incomprehensible about women. The animal within them is desirous of procreating children, and when remaining unfruitful gets discontented and angry, and wandering in every direction through the body, drives them to extremity, causing all varieties of disease. Hippocrates described how the female reproductive parts, moving, convulsing, or prolapsing, cause dizziness, motor paralysis, and sensory disturbance. Galen regarded the cause as being due to the retention of excessive menstrual blood. A rise of hysteria diagnosis was accompanied by a rise in literacy and personal freedom. During the Victorian period of the 1900s, doctors claimed that a key cause of hysteria was the alleged dangerous behaviors of intellectual women, including attending school and working outside of the home. By 1913, a study by Havelock Ellis estimated that 75% of women suffered from female hysteria. At its core, hysteria was a diagnosis for any woman with any ailment that prevented her from fulfilling gender roles to the degree that the men around her required. Be it becoming too smart, too literate, too frigid, or simply too disagreeable, any so-called personality defect could lead to a hysteria diagnosis. The restraints of the time period upon women's freedoms ensured that if there was any envy of man, it was of their privileges to do what they wished, in comparison to the relative enslavement of female life. Penis envy, as described by Freud, is truly a misnomer. As stated by Clara Thompson, the position of underprivileged might be symbolically expressed in the term penis, and be using the penis as a symbol of the more privileged sex. Similarly, in a matriarchal culture, one can imagine that the symbol for power might be the breast. This type of power will be somewhat different, the best ending for life-giving capacity as in force and energy. The essential significance in both cases will be the importance in the cultural setting of the possessor of the symbol. Women did not envy the penis for its flaccidness, for its vulnerability, for its ability to breed without pain, to harm, or to rape. Women envied the man for his freedom and for denying her of her own. Karen Horney protested the concept of penis envy as being women strafing against societal constraints of their gender. In other words, the existence of misogyny. Horney believed that womb envy arises when men realize they are not as in control and powerful in their lives as they had originally thought they were. Gayatri Spivak also addresses womb envy and how Freud ignored the capabilities of a woman. The term womb envy also extends to describe the envy men can feel because they are unable to perform the same biological functions as women are, such as pregnancy, giving birth, and breastfeeding. Sound familiar? With how much men love to control the reproductivity of women, with how much they fetishize us and hate us for it all the same, with how much they wish to be us and mimic us, doesn't it just make sense? Women would never envy the penis. We envy the rights that penis owners have. We envy the world that has been built for you, from its medicine down to construction of the very homes we inhabit. But we do not envy you the way that you envy us. It is important to keep this historical context in mind when surveying figures of the past. Many women are being retroactively branded as trans men because of how they were forced to present themselves in order to live freely. Take, for example, the way that Joan of Arc has been portrayed in the recent adaptation. Instead of realizing that Joan's choice in clothing was a manner of protection against sexual assault, as trousers were far more difficult to remove than dresses, or that her decision to fight for a cause she believed in was inherently at odds with the restrictions on the female gender, people instead decide to say that she was not female at all. She was. She was prosecuted for being female. She was not trans or non-binary. She was a woman trying to protect herself and work towards her life's goal in a world actively hostile to those of the female sex. Another example is the doctor James Barry, who dressed as a man because women could not practice medicine. Barry managed to keep this secret until death when her sex was revealed post-mortem. It was not because Barry was trans or non-binary, it was because there was no other option for her to practice medicine unless she hid her sex. Or Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh of Egypt who had no choice but to style herself as a king in order to hold on to power. In death, any evidence of her rule was categorically wiped out because of her sex. None of these women envied men for their penis, but for their ability to be treated as human. Labeling these women as trans ignores the struggles that they faced as women during their time periods, and furthermore erases the effort they had to make in order to be recognized for their extraordinary actions. Don't erase female excellence by claiming that they were really men all along. In contrast, I've seen few call the way that trans women seem to have a similar envy of female reproductive power out as such. If anyone is envious of the opposite sex reproductive ability, it's trans women who mimic our bodies and wish to find a way to subvert nature to copy us in a fetishistic way. Take, for example, the fascination with breastfeeding or womb implants. Several trans women have posted stories on Reddit, and there's even been a supposedly scientific article on the phenomenon of men breastfeeding infants. However, little has been said about what the effect of breast milk made via a combination of untested hormones and drugs would do to an infant, especially since the composition of breast milk changes over time and serves as a specific role in infant development. Much talk has been made about uterus transplants, but few seem to realize that the venture itself is pointless. A male's body cannot shift to grow an infant. The pelvis is not moved to allow a child to be born. The specific hormones needed to allow for healthy growth cannot be made in the same way that cross-sex hormones are. In addition, the uterus for transplants must come from someone, and despite many women claiming not to need their own, the uterus plays a bigger role than merely a child factory. It's a hormone regulator, a needed part of the female body which keeps organs in place, maintains overall health, and plays a major role in orgasm. Though many still seem to hold Freud's ideas in high regards, I find Karen Horney's concept of womb envy to be far more realistic. What women envy about men is simple: to be seen as a human being. Meanwhile, when men covet women, it is because they wish to be objectified and desire our own reproductive ability. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I find this concept to be very, very interesting, particularly because in one of my classes last year, we went over this topic, and I really wanted to be that annoying feminist in class who brought up how, why we still listen to Freud, how that was such a stupid concept, because literally what proof do we have? but they moved away from it really quickly, and then they wanted to add in some guy in class was like, but this doesn't include trans people or non-binary people, and it was such an annoying conversation. Alas, it's fine. That's what this channel is for me to rant at you guys about topics that I find interesting, and this is one of them. To be honest, I think it makes sense. It's one of the best explanations I can think of. They're envious of our wombs. They're envious that they can't create life like we can. Maybe it's a little bit hippie of an idea, but I do think that it makes sense. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them down below, suggestions, etc., etc. Thank you to my members, the singular one that I have. You're awesome. I appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.